in for our daily analysis of testimony at the Murdaugh murders trial. Our expert trial attorney, Carl B. Grant, back with us again today. Carl, compelling testimony on the stand today. The state's rebuttal case may have been more compelling than their main case just because it was much more concise, a lot easier to follow. And Dr. Kinsey, what an excellent witness.
Yes, he is the man, as they say.
Yes.
Okay? Yeah. When it comes to crime scene analysis, he is really the guy, and he is excellent. He's an excellent witness. And the prosecution, using the attorney general to examine him, that was an excellent move. It shows that the AG is putting his name, his political weight behind this case, and it shows how important he considers this case to be.
Carl, before we get into some of the testimony that we heard today, how rare is it to see an attorney general question someone during a murder trial?
Well, first of all, murder trials are normally prosecuted by the solicitor's office. Murder charges are it's kind of grunt work, okay? It's done by the local solicitor's office, and the only time the attorney general got involved in this case, of course, is when there was a conflict of interest with the local solicitor's office in that area. I have tried a case where the attorney general's office prosecuted the case and the AG showed up in the courtroom, but he did not come to the table to actually prosecute. So that's a rare scenario for the actual AG to actually get in the trenches and be part of the prosecution team.
Dr. Kinsey, I should say, Dr. Kinsey, because he does have those credentials. He went through with the AG a couple of demonstrations in the courtroom. Let's take a look at one of those, and then we'll talk about the impact on the other side.
Did you ever have a conversation with Alec Murdaugh about him asking you permission or even telling you about installing blue lights in his private vehicle?
No, sir. I never had a conversation with Alec Murdaugh. Matter of fact, I never had a conversation with anyone in my 39 years about installing blue lights in their personal vehicle.
That's not something that's done, is it, sir?
Oh, no, no.
Did you know anything about the defendant claiming that you permitted him to do so until he testified to that last week?
Correct. Mm-hmm.
In your professional opinion, can you exclude a 6'4" defendant like Alec Murdaugh, or anyone for that matter at that height, from shooting that shotgun at that angle?
Absolutely not.
When the defense expert says that the shooter has to be between 5'2" and 5'4", do you disagree with that?
I do disagree with that wholeheartedly.
With what degree of certainty do you think they're wrong in their conclusions?
I just think it's an unknown. I mean, there's many more variables you have to know. How the shooter was holding the gun, you know, how his proportion to legs matches up with body. I mean, that's something that we're all a little bit different. And unless you've got a video of that or someone tells you how they held a weapon, I think the notion that being able to look at this evidence and determine that is unscientific.
Okay, so that was Dr. Kinsey that you heard from second there, but since we played that soundbite from Sheriff Smalls, let's go ahead and address that because that was just as compelling because he directly contradicted and refuted Alec Murdaugh's testimony, who suggested last week that the sheriff gave him authority to have blue lights added to his vehicle, and he made it crystal clear, never happened.
It sets the stage for the prosecution to say, this man has the unmitigated audacity to get on the witness stand and literally lie to you directly to your face also. And we called the retired chief of police who said, I didn't authorize any blue light installation on his cars. So if he said that, that's a lie too. So yes, that was very compelling.
And then moving on to Dr. Kinsey, he talked about the height of the shooter. That was important because he refuted what the defense was trying to put out there, that it may have been someone 5'2", someone shorter. You know, the prosecution at one point said, okay, you're describing the height of a 12-year-old. But realistically, Kinsey is saying today that it could have been someone the same height as Alec Murdaugh.
The various variables that he talked about, he explained how it could have been. And one thing about Kinsey is, by him not being exclusive, as the defense expert was, he maintains credibility. Remember I talked about this, sometimes in a trial, you have to admit those things that you have to admit just to maintain credibility with the jury.
Right.
So he said, listen, I can't really say whether the person was 5'4" or 6'4", but I'm not going to say no more than 5'2" or 5'4". That's just impossible.
Kinsey also gave a powerful demonstration in the courtroom that the Attorney General participated in that raised questions about the defense theory regarding how Paul was shot. So let's take a listen to that, and then we'll talk about that as well.
I think the theory is preposterous, in my opinion.
Can you walk me through why you think it's preposterous?
Absolutely. Number one, that dry lock number 2 shot shell fires a projectile at 1,450 feet per second once it leaves the muzzle of that weapon. As was mentioned, that's a millisecond. That's fast. To think that the pressure from flesh and bone will cause that pellet, those steel pellets now, we're not talking about lead. Lead's a little bit more giving. Lead is malleable. It will crush or flatten. We're talking about steel, BB pellets. They will turn around because of the pressure, go back the opposite direction, 180-degree direction at enough velocity to dent a steel exterior door and embed in the door frame. That doesn't happen.
Listen, it doesn't get more compelling and clearer than that, because right before he gave that testimony, they stood in the doorway, the Attorney General with that long weapon, and walked through the defense's theory that the shooter went through the doorway as Paul was coming through and turned and somehow had this long gun pointed to his head and shot him in the head that way, even though all of the fragments and all the evidence was in the ceiling and in the roof of the doorway.
When your expert can relegate the other expert's opinion to being preposterous, using
Preposterous,
the word,
yes.
that's a very strong rebuttal. So yes, he did a great job with that. But again, it ultimately is going to come to what will the jury believe now that all the evidence is in, and when they see the crime scene tomorrow. And this really emphasizes how important the closing arguments are going to be. I know the closing arguments are not evidence in a case, but somebody has to be able to talk to that jury and deliver like never before. I'm not sure who they're going to choose, but I do know one thing. It needs to be somebody that if they were called on Sunday morning to preach, they need to be able to preach.
That's a good way to put it in talking about the jurors visiting the Moselle property tomorrow. How is that a plus for the defense at this point, taking them to the scene of where the murders happened? And the same question for the prosecution.
Well, it's like Mr. Harpootlian said about time, space, and distance. That's what he wants the jury to appreciate, things that you can't really tell by virtue of a photograph. I indicated earlier, I had a jury go to a crime scene before many years ago in a capital murder case, and fortunately, my client was found not guilty. He walked out the courtroom and went home. So it can benefit you, but it can also hurt you. It really depends on what the jury perceives when they get there and determine exactly what it is that they think is important, regardless of what you might think is important.
All right, expert analysis, so interesting. And now we're getting closer to jury deliberations. Once closing arguments start, we will be broadcasting live from Walterboro until we reach a verdict.
Yeah, so that will be very interesting to see how this all plays out. And Carl P. Grant will be there in Walterboro, live from the scene, giving us updates as well.